Oftentimes our big break comes from the least expected places. Helen understands this fact, and meeting a young girl like Diane McCarthy gives her hope that nice people still exist, as it also brings hope for her Forest Cove B&B. In the opening scene of Change of Heart, we see Andy, who is rounding up his interview with Sarge in the Army's base. Meanwhile, another soldier right there, Jones, is watching a reality TV show, and he is engrossed. Sarge is grateful for the opportunity to work with Andy on the article, and even escorts him to the airport as his subordinate. Jones is still super engrossed in a reality TV show. Jared's show keeps getting bigger. He wants to spice things up a bit, as he wants to work with the Shangri-La Hotel and Spa, but this doesn't sit well with Diane, who just walks into his office and overhears him. Diane happens to be the show's producer, while Jared is her arrogant ex-boyfriend. I know this is quite a complicated work structure. She tries to explain that doing a hotel reality show might be too informal. But Jared shuts her up when he asks if she wants to be beaten by another producer, as he doesn't want another show to overtake theirs. This successfully frustrates her. In the next scene, Andy, who is back in the USA and in town, calls his friend Brian after getting out of the taxi. Brian is happy to hear from him, and he informs Andy of the struggles that his mom Helen has been going through for a while now, as her business is falling apart. Andy is grateful for Brian, who's tried his best to be there for his mom when he was away, even though it's tough. In the office, Gina, Diane's friend, walks into her office trying to find out if Jared got the memo from Florida, but Diane doesn't know. Instead, she pours out her frustration to Gina on how Jared still thinks they're dating, but her friend just expresses how bad the idea of dating your boss is. Diane clarifies that he was her boyfriend before he became her boss. She's impressed when she sees that Diane's website, E-Dining with Edina, is more popular, and surprised she hasn't told anyone, even Jared. They don't have time to talk again, as Diane needs to go check out the Shangri-La Hotel and Spa that Jared sent her to earlier that day. Meanwhile, Andy finally reaches home, and his mother is surprised and happy to see him. Diane is not familiar with the way, so she uses the car's GPS while on the phone with Gina. She teases her about her alias, which is Diane Brown, as it's not much of a change from her real name, Diane McCarthy. At Forest Cove B&B, Dr. Charles Burke, their regular customer, comes to check in, and Helen catches up with him. She seems giddy when she sees him. She instructs Andy to carry his things to his room. Charles promises Helen that he'll catch up more when he comes back downstairs. Diane, who's been trying to find Cedar Road, gets lost, and her GPS doesn't help at all. She gets stuck in a hole as she's trying to reverse. As they head upstairs, a worried Andy tries to find out from Charles how hard things have been for his mother, but Charles assures him that she'll be all right, as every business has its ups and downs. Back at the office, Gina walks up to Jared, who's looking at his pictures in front of a mirror. She reminds him that he said he'd look for a host for her, and also expresses how much she wants to be on the camera, just like him. Unfortunately, her hopes are dashed as Jared spews nonsense about him being a natural star, and offers her to be an extra for him instead, and Gina walks away disappointed. Out of frustration, Gina applies for Ben's improv school. At Forest Cove B&B, Andy tries to talk things over with his mom concerning the repairs at the shop, but she lets him know that business is slow, and she doesn't have money for the repairs yet. She even encourages him to repair some things, as their handyman quit and left for Shangri-La instead, the same hotel Diane is trying to find. A customer interrupts them asking where he can get the Wi-Fi connection, and when she goes with him, Andy sneaks through her drawers, frustrated by all the bills with past dues, and even a final notice. Diane has no option but to walk with her luggage, but the weather doesn't help matters as it starts raining. After a while, she comes across the Forest Cove B&B and goes in there to make a call, but Helen insists she stays, offering to dry her clothes and even get her a meal. Diane is so grateful that she's moved to tears. Gina goes for her class at Ben's improv school, where she freely informs Ben that she wants to be a television host, and wishes and would love to practice and maybe get an improv interview, even though she works at Jaunt's with Jared. Gina is happy and excited when Ben answers her positively. At last, a breath of fresh air from the negativity of Jared. At the B&B, Diane tries to inform Jared of her situation, but is interrupted by Helen, who brings in food for her. Worried for her, Helen advises her to stay the night, as she won't be able to get to her car till the next day. She even promises her that she won't be charged for the night, and Diane keeps getting surprised by such a B&B. She doesn't hide this fact from her fans on her website. At the end of the class at Ben's improv, Ben gives them an assignment to each form a character, as their characters will be guests at Gina's TV show, since she'll be playing the role of a host. This move greatly encourages Gina. The next day, Diane wakes up to the noise generated from her balcony. She goes there to tell the person to stop, and instead meets Andy making some repairs. He informs her that it's noon. She's surprised to know that Andy is Helen's son, and Helen, who sees them from the lawn, invites her down for breakfast. After freshening up, Diane is downstairs ready to leave after her breakfast, but she decides to stay after hearing that her car still needs some work. Moreover, she's already in love with the place. She also decides to pay for her stay, as she doesn't want to be indebted to Helen anymore, and Helen happily agrees. As she spends more time in Forest Cove, Diane keeps getting wowed, and writes all about it on her blog, E-Dining with Edina. She also meets people who have fallen in love with Forest Cove, and who are still drawn to the place, as it holds a special meaning to them, even with its run-down situation. Andy pays a visit to his friend Brian at his workplace, and they're happy to see each other. Andy truthfully explains that he doesn't know what to do with his mom's B&B, as he'll soon be leaving, and his mom can't afford another handyman. Unfortunately, he can't get into much detail, as he gets a call from his mom and has to leave. At the filming site, Jared gets a visit from Lynn, a host. She invites him to her show, which is a first for Jared, and hopes that he can do whatever it takes to get the ratings. Back at Forest Cove, Diane meets Helen baking. She decides to give a helping hand, as Helen is struggling to make the pie. Although Helen doesn't want to put a guest to work, she gives in when Diane assures her that she does it to relax. Helen is happy to indulge her, as she feels like everyone coming to her place is family. Andy walks in, informing Helen of some things she needs to check out. When she leaves, he engages Diane in a conversation. He reveals that he doesn't accept the way his mother treats the guests at Forest Cove, believing it will only run down the place, and she won't be able to keep up. But contrary to his belief, Diane believes that she doesn't need money to be recognized, and that the hospitality his mother gives is missing in present-day hotels. At the office, Gina gets a call from Diane telling her about her new show idea, with Forest Cove at the center. Gina believes something is wrong, and Diane tries to convince her to work with Forest Cove. With the situation out of her hands, Gina puts the phone on speaker instead, involving Jared and her other co-workers Judd and Eric, as Diane has to convince Jared. Jared takes the opportunity to tell them about the pulling out of Lynn's former show, and the opportunity it has brought Jaunts with Jared. They might even get a spin-off. Gina feels a new show is problematic, but Diane jumps in, putting Forest Cove on the table. Jared is skeptical at first, since she says it's run down, but surprisingly agrees almost immediately after evaluating the situation. He informs Diane to stay put and get more information about the place. She's happy that he agreed, and Jared is happy, as it makes great TV. Everyone is shocked at how the arrogant Jared readily agreed. But when Eric asks why, Jared reveals the sinister plans he has, and that he's going to make the place look worse than it seems. At Ben's improv, Gina and her classmates finish their act, and Ben releases them. He asks Gina to wait behind, wanting to talk about her act, and she's so sure that she messed up. However, Ben assures her that she's special and has talent, but needs a little work and real-life experience. He promises to text her the time and place of when they'll meet. Andy meets his mom and Charles outside, and wants to know if she needs anything fixed, since he's going to town. But when she starts naming a lot of things, he realizes it's what he gets for asking. This makes Helen and Charles laugh, especially when he ironically adds that he's his mother's best employee. Andy meets with Brian at his workplace again. The confusion and frustration are clear in his voice as he explains his mom's unpaid bills, and how they might soon cut the light. Seeing this, Brian suggests that he sells the place, but Andy doesn't want it to come to that, as it will cause his mother pain. She cherishes the place, as it holds great memories for her. Brian advises himself to just think about it, since he doesn't need to rush his decision. Tammy, the waitress, brings Diane's lunch, and she tries to get more information on what the people do around the place. She finds out that they hike, fish, and even have a hayride. Helen checks up on Diane and finds out that she has decided to stay. She is happy that she was successful in making her stay. Helen goes outside and has a seat with Charles on the lawn. Once again, she shows what makes her place special. As they're talking, she notices Bill, a young painter who's lodging in Forest Cove. She goes back in, sending Tammy to get him food. Top-notch hospitality. Outside, Tammy hands Bill his meal, and when Bill asks her to review his work, she gives an honest opinion, as she doesn't understand what he's doing. In the next scene, Jared calls Lynn, giving her an update on the progress of their work, as they've found the right place. Exasperated Lynn, who doesn't care about all this, orders him to just get the ratings and make it memorable. Back at Forest Cove, Andy comes in and sees Diane working. He apologizes for the way he spoke earlier, as he was only worried for his mom, and Diane brushes it off as she never took it to heart. Jared wonders why she's working even though she's on vacation, and Diane claims she got urgent work. She gets a call from Gina, who informs her that the network has approved their show. Due to that, Jared is coming for a drive-by to gauge the place, and he wants to meet her for dinner. Diane is excited to inform Helen and Andy, but unfortunately, she has to stay undercover. Helen is excited, as Jared's show has boosted a business in their locality before, but Andy discourages her because he believes that most reality shows focus on the problems of each business. At that point, Diane walks in. She immediately negates Andy's idea, having an absurd assurance that the show is for the better. Helen watches as the two of them bicker, and she does not even pay them any mind, as she's already made up her mind to do the show. So, she instead instructs the two to look around for places to repair. Andy and Diane go outside, looking around, and as Andy informs her on the bulk of things they need to repair, Diane comes across a mini Forest Cove that was made as a token of thanks by a grateful couple. Diane notices that the place is full of homely things that have meaning, and it surprises Andy how much she cares. He wants to know if the show will give a good review, and she assures him that it will, not knowing the terrible plan that Jared has. Their conversation takes another turn as they start talking about Andy's job. But when he makes mention of her job, she claims she's a writer. She quickly scurries away, using the excuse of calling her office to escape more questions. Diane, who stands at the door to call Gina because of bad reception, starts planning with Gina. She informs her of the things and spots they must film, Helen's cooking being one of them. The network cuts abruptly, and they end the call. In Andy's study, while speaking with his mom, he wants to know the name of the show so he can check it out. But instead, out of nowhere, Helen mentions how much she likes Diane. Taking a hint at what she's up to, Andy begs her not to meddle. In the kitchen, Helen, Diane, and Tammy are cooking when a customer comes in with a complaint. Diane immediately solves it by asking Tammy if she can redo the meal, leaving a nice impression on Helen. Helen believes she could hire her, but feels bad that she's working as a guest who might soon leave. Diane takes the opportunity to extend her stay, not wanting to miss the big show, and Helen readily agrees. Tammy brings Bill the painter his lunch, and once again, he asks her to review his work because he wishes to know if she likes it. Tammy advises him that it's best if he likes what he's doing, even though he's applying to a school. Tammy gets distracted by a plant that doesn't seem to be doing well, and she starts taking care of it. The two get talking, and as Tammy takes care of the plant, Bill draws her, and it comes out beautifully. In the kitchen, when Charles finds out that the snacks are courtesy of Helen, he teases her for not having a normal hobby like knitting. Helen drives him out when he tries to steal a cookie. There seems to be a force of attraction hovering over the B&B. At the reception, Andy walks in on Diane, who is taking pictures of the fireplace and different spots. He informs her that he washed her car. At the same time, he tries to discourage her from being his mother's baker, but she doesn't budge, claiming that she loves baking. They agree to go for the hayride. She's relieved when Andy leaves and resumes taking pictures immediately. At the office, Jod implores Gina to send all the pictures Diane took to Jared, and not just the best one. However, Gina is saddened, wondering what he's up to now. At Forest Cove, Andy gets the hay truck ready, and Diane is excited to try it again after a long time. She's shocked that Andy can drive a hay truck, and he assures her she's in good hands, as his father taught him how to. They go on the ride, but it gets bumpy after a while, and unfortunately Diane pours her soda on herself. Andy stops the car, apologizing for the mess he caused, but Diane doesn't take it to heart. But Diane is shocked when Andy mentions her home, and he reveals that he knows who she is. She is scared that he may be angry, but he reveals that he isn't, but rather disappointed that they can't acknowledge her as Edna. Phew. What he knows is not what she is scared of in this case. Diane is relieved that he doesn't know she works for Jared, but is also excited to meet one of her readers. Andy offers to take her on a walk. On his way to Forest Cove, Jared talks with Eric about strategies to improve the rundown state of the B&B. During their walk, Andy and Diane talk more about their work as writers and the hardships that come with it. Gina's call informing her that Jared has come interrupts them, and Diane has to get going, even though she doesn't want to. Andy rushes to help his mother, who's struggling to bring in her new coffee machine. She plays his worry off lightly, kissing him. Looking around, Andy sighs, removing the real estate card Brian gave him and calling the agent. It seems he's finally considering selling the property. At the restaurant, Jared hands flowers to Diane as a token of appreciation, after signing an autograph for a fan. She reluctantly collects it, not wanting him to misunderstand their relationship. Seeing Hay, Jared thinks she's taking her undercover job too seriously, and she tries to explain that it's a nice place that reminds one of the family. Jared doesn't get it, still wanting to go to a fancy place, and Diane tries to pressure him into giving a glowing review by fixing the place up. When Jared refuses to be pressured, she leaves the place, not even taking the flowers. Andy is rounding up his call with the agent when Diane walks in. She claims to have been with a friend, but Andy notes that it's someone she doesn't like. He isn't surprised when she says it's her ex. Surprisingly, Diane urges Andy about the repairs, suddenly agreeing that reality shows might focus on the negative aspects. In the next scene, it's night already, and Tammy is closing up outside. Bill walks up to her, handing her a book on botany he bought while in town. She's grateful, but doesn't agree with his opinion when he advises her to study botany. They both have their differences, as Bill also doesn't agree that he should draw people, since the art market is based on emotions. On that note, Tammy bids him a good night. Meanwhile, in her room, Diane informs Gina about the deal she made with Jared, that if she fixes Forest Cove up, he'll give them a good review. Gina thinks she won't have time as the shooting is close, but she has hope when Diane informs her of Andy's support. She smiles knowingly when her friend says that Andy is okay. It appears his handsomeness is getting to her. The next day, they all get to work fixing up the place and making Forest Cove look new again. Helen is happy with the work that they've done, as the place looks so much better. With the pressure of impressing Jared on her, Diane tries to get more things fixed, even though she's relieved that the stained wall will be covered by Bill's painting of Tammy. But Andy argues that it's not possible, as they don't have the budget for the repairs. Helen advises them to chill out, but is shocked when Andy wants to go out to see a friend. Finally having her time with Ben, Gina wonders how having coffee can help her. Going into why he brought her out, Ben advises Gina that she should stop trying too hard to run after Jared, and find her voice instead. He challenges her to interview a stranger, telling her to be herself when she tries to protest. She's nervous at first and starts awkwardly, but with Ben's help, she's able to compose herself and talk to Dan, the stranger. Meanwhile, Andy meets with the real estate agent, ready to sell Forest Cove. Having finished with Dan, Gina is excited as it went well, and she finally finds what she's missing. She's grateful to Ben and hugs him in appreciation. At Forest Cove, Diane updates her blog once again about how simple and homely the place is. She comes across Charles and finally asks about his conference. Charles reveals that he just came to be with Helen and not at a conference, but he's afraid of Helen's reaction if he lets her know the truth. Diane feels like Helen knows and is just not letting it on, encouraging him a little, and Charles is sincerely thankful to her. The next morning, while Andy and Diane are working, he gets to know more about her personality and is impressed. He believes her ex was lucky and wonders what he thinks of her blog, but learns that he doesn't know. Helen, in her ever-maternal nature, brings them lunch, not taking no for an answer. Back at the office, Gina overhears Jared and Eric planning more horrid things for the show, like setting a rat in the kitchen and filming it. She's disgusted and urgently gets to her phone. At Forest Cove, Tammy gets Helen and Bill to review his work. Helen believes that he'll find the right inspiration very soon, encouraging him. Later, she tries to set Tammy up with Bill, officially meddling for love's sake once again. Meanwhile, Andy and Diane are on the lawn, when Andy is taken back in memory as he looks around. Diane is wowed at how Forest Cove means so much to many people, and is very important, making Andy realize how much he missed home. He reveals to Diane that he usually stays away from the place, but has been wanting to stay there more since she's been there. However, the ever-evasive Diane reacts by heading inside immediately. Could it mean that she has feelings for him? Time will tell. In her office, Helen practices her speech with a mirror in hand, while Andy walks in on her. He's happy for her, but worried that she'll be disappointed in the end. When he voices his thoughts, Helen goes on the defensive, claiming he hasn't watched a show, and he promises to watch one. While Diane and Helen are baking in the kitchen, Diane takes the opportunity to ask Helen how she feels about Charles. Helen claims she sees him as a friend, but when she talks about him, it seems like more emotions are attached. Diane implores her to find love for herself and stop focusing on others. Diane is happily writing on her blog when a call comes to the house. Tammy, who picked up the call, hands it to Diane. She's in a happy mood, asking Gina to come so that they can enjoy Forest Cove together. But the mood changes fast when Gina informs her that Jared is about to throw her under the bus, as they're planning to emphasize the negative things, and that he's on his way already. She implores her to quickly find a way to cancel the show, leaving Diane in a tight position, as she doesn't know how to handle it. The next day, as Tammy is setting up the tables outside, Bill meets her, annoyed that she hung his painting of her. Instead, she advises him to take his advice and do what he loves, as she has already done that and applied for botany, just like he suggested. Before going on her journey to Forest Cove, Gina gets permission from Ben, as she won't be able to attend class that evening. Ben is disappointed that she won't be around, but is happy to know that she'll be in the next class. He advises her not to pitch Jared, as he's someone who feels easily threatened and might ruin her work. Seems it's a love season because, while at it, Ben also takes up the courage to ask Gina out, and it's a lucky day for him, because she accepts. In the next scene, Jared is surprised to see Diane at the restaurant, Owen's place. She reprimands him for stabbing her in the back, but an ever-arrogant Jared claims he never made a deal with her, and is just giving the fans what they want. Diane is disgusted by him and she rushes to Forest Cove urgently, looking for Andy, but doesn't find him. Meanwhile, Andy, who's in his study, gets a call from Jod looking for Diane McCarthy. He's confused at first, and doesn't say anything when Jod corrects himself, saying he's looking for Diane Brown. However, the cat is soon let out of the bag as Andy figures it out when Jod slips up once more, saying Jared's name. Wanting to be sure that Diane works for the show, Andy checks it up on the internet, and sees a picture of Diane and Jared. Just then, Diane walks in, saying she has something to say, but Andy already knows who she is. Desperate, she informs Andy about Jared's plan, imploring him to believe in her, but he has lost all faith in her. She advises him to pull out of the show, but it's too late as they've already signed a contract. Diane is relieved when Andy says he has a plan B, but when she learns that he plans to sell the place, she discourages him by giving him excuses as to why he shouldn't. One of the most important ones is that it would break Helen's heart, but Andy is not ready to listen, especially not from her. Andy heads downstairs, meeting his mother in the kitchen. He quietly breaks the news of who Diane is to her, but surprisingly, Helen doesn't believe she's a bad person. Andy also informs her of his plans to sell Forest Cove, and though Helen is not happy about this, she understands that she has to sell it if the show goes awry. On seeing Andy's protest about doing the show, she promises to give him her blessing to sell the place as long as she does the show. Andy has no choice but to accept her decision to follow her heart, and they even hug it out. Diane takes her leave, paying for her stay and apologizing sincerely for the problems she caused. She tries to advise Helen not to do the show, but she insists on doing it, trusting that Diane will come up with a way. Diane meets with Gina at Owen's and once again pours out her true feelings on the ongoing issue. She feels bad and doesn't even know how to face Andy and Helen. Gina chides her for always hiding behind Edna and implores her to be her true self. The statement switches on a light bulb in Diane's head as she comes up with a solution for the problem. As Andy shows the real estate agent around Forest Cove, he's reminded of his childhood. He feels skeptical when the agent makes a statement about changing the place. He promises to get back to him though, after checking with his mom. After a short while, Bill comes down with his luggage, and Andy is sad to see him go without finding his art. But when Andy looks through the paintings Bill gave him, he's amazed at his talent. He believes that landscape might be his art, but they don't get to finish the conversation as Helen complains about the stain on the wall. Bill offers to draw a mural, and Helen is happy to indulge him. She even allows him to sign his name boldly on the painting. Andy gets to know that his mom is still willing to go along with her plan because she believes Diane will come up with something. As for Diane's situation, she believes Andy should not judge her harshly, knowing that they had a spark going. However, Andy feels there's no point, as their lives will soon go back to normal. But Helen lets him know that a lot can happen in a day. The next day, the van arrives and the crew sets up for the filming. Diane is worried that her plan might not work, and to top it all off, Andy is ignoring her. Jared walks up to where she and Gina are standing, and she ignores him. He drags her to the stairs, promising her full control of the show if it's a success, while sneakily putting a fake mouse on the stairs. But Andy catches him in the act and hands it back to him. This revelation leaves Diane even angrier. Jared gets a call from Lynn. Lynn informs Jared of the uproar the people are having due to a certain Edna's blog, and instructs him to abort the mission. That means he is not to give a bad review of Forest Cove. Jared is very angry as things don't go according to his plan, and it only gets worse when he discovers that Diane is Edna. He walks out of the show, deciding not to host it, but Diane quickly recovers, telling Gina to host instead. The crew feels relieved, as Jared was a thorn in their side anyway, so it's a win for them. Later, Diane goes to Andy's study to apologize to him, but Andy, who has already read her blog, cuts her some slack. Just as he advises her to stop hiding, she also reminds him of what his home means to him, so he shouldn't sell it. Andy informs her of his decision not to go to Australia, and finally confesses that he wants to be with her. They seal their newfound love with a kiss. Meanwhile, Helen, who's outside the door, is happy that her meddling is finally paying off. But there is still another love story waiting to happen. When Charles finds Helen, she reveals she knew all along he wasn't there for the conference. Charles finally confesses his feelings for Helen, and is happy that she reciprocates this feeling too. But Andy, who is eavesdropping, finds it weird. Well, the elderly deserve love as much as anyone else, after all. Meanwhile, Tammy informs Bill how proud she is of him for his mural painting, and he finally understands what she meant with finding himself. Finally, the show starts with Gina as the lead host. Andy invites Diane to help in the management of Forest Cove, as his mother will be busy with Charles. He teases her for meddling in a lot of things, but she lets him know it's not meddling if it's out of love. They kiss and the show goes on. The last scene fades as Andy and Diane go for a picnic talking about their plans together. Forest Cove is no doubt a place to feel at home, find family, purpose, and most importantly, love.